So I've been looking at my phone, my laptop, the software I use every day, and a pattern really starts to emerge. Most of it, at its core, traces back to United States innovation and United States companies. For decades, that's just been the way it is. But lately, I've been noticing a fundamental shift happening on a global scale. It's not loud or flashy, but it's incredibly significant. Countries around the world are starting to actively and strategically move away from this reliance on American technology. It's a quiet decoupling, a deliberate effort to build their own digital foundations from the ground up. This isn't just about national pride or creating local jobs, though that's part of it. What we're witnessing is the early stages of a fracturing global tech order. The single, interconnected digital world we've gotten used to is splintering into distinct spheres of influence. These moves are deeply tied to geopolitics, national security, and a contest for what you could call digital supremacy. It's about controlling data, securing critical infrastructure, and making sure that a nation's digital future isn't subject to the policies or whims of another country. The implications here are massive. This isn't just a story for policy wonks or international relations experts. It affects the devices we'll use, the services we can access, and the very architecture of the internet itself. So today, we're going to break down 7 key examples of nations taking these bold steps. We'll look at why they're doing it, how they're doing it, and what it means for the future of tech. This is a big one. Let's get into it. Made in China 2025 becomes reality. All right, first up, the one you've probably heard the most about, China. For years, the Made in China 2025 initiative sounded like a far-off ambition, a goal on a government spreadsheet. But now it's becoming a tangible reality, and honestly, it's happening faster than anyone expected. The core idea is simple: achieve self-sufficiency in critical tech sectors. We're talking about the really hard stuff. Semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum computing. This isn't about building another social media app. It's about controlling the fundamental building blocks of modern technology. Every new smartphone, every data center, every smart car relies on these components. The real catalyst here, the thing that poured gasoline on the fire, was the series of United States export controls. By restricting access to advanced American chip-making equipment and software, the United States essentially forced China's hand. Instead of slowing them down, it seems to have triggered an all-out, state-led sprint toward independence. We're seeing massive government investment pouring into domestic chip foundries like SemiC and AI giants like Baidu and Alibaba. They are relentlessly reverse engineering, innovating, and building their own supply chains, even if the initial results aren't on par with the absolute cutting edge from TSMC or NVIDIA. The goal isn't just to catch up, but to create a completely parallel tech ecosystem. What this means is that we're seeing a genuine bifurcation of the tech world. You have Chinese companies like Huawei, despite being cut off from Google's mobile services, developing their own operating system, Harmony OS, and their own advanced Kirin processors. They are designing a future where they don't need United States tech at any level of the stack, from the silicon in the phone to the cloud services it connects to. This isn't just a response to sanctions anymore. It's a long-term strategic vision for a world where China sets its own technological standards, insulated from outside political pressures. It's a massive, high-stakes bet on self-reliance. Sanctions forcing a tech Cold War. Now let's pivot to Russia, where the story is less about long-term strategic ambition and more about forced adaptation in the face of immense pressure. The sweeping sanctions imposed over the past few years have effectively cut Russia off from the mainstream global tech supply chain. We're talking about access to everything from Intel and AMD processors to Microsoft Windows and Oracle databases. When your country is suddenly unplugged from the tools that run modern businesses and government, you have 2 choices: find a workaround or build your own. Russia is trying to do both. This has created what you could call a new tech Cold War. On one front, they are scrambling to build domestic capacity. We're seeing Russian companies like Yadro working on servers and storage systems, and efforts to develop homegrown processors like the Elbrus and Baikal chips. To be clear, these are not competing with the latest from Apple or Intel, not even close. But the goal right now isn't performance leadership. It's about creating a baseline of sovereign technology that can run essential services without relying on Western imports. It's about digital survival. On the other front, where domestic production can't keep up, they're relying on what are called parallel imports or parallel supply chains. Essentially, this is a gray market where goods from companies like Apple and Dell are rerouted through third-party countries to bypass official sanctions. It's a messy, unreliable, and often more expensive solution, but it fills the gaps. The result is a fragmented and isolated tech landscape. It's a stark example of how geopolitical conflict can instantly erect digital walls, forcing a nation to cobble together a functional tech ecosystem from domestic projects and gray market imports, creating a deep and likely permanent rift with the Western tech sphere. Chapter 4: Guarded by Data Localization Laws. Okay, let's talk about India. This one is a bit different. It's not about sanctions or an arms race for chip manufacturing. Instead, India's approach to tech sovereignty is centered on one incredibly valuable resource in the 21st century: data. India has been systematically rolling out a series of data localization laws that are fundamentally changing the rules of the game for global tech companies. The core principle is straightforward. The data of Indian citizens should, for the most part, be stored and processed within India's borders. For United States cloud giants like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud, this is a huge deal. Their entire business model is built on massive centralized data centers that serve entire regions. These laws force them to make a choice: either build expensive, dedicated data centers inside India to comply, or risk being locked out of one of the world's fastest-growing digital markets. It's a move designed to give the Indian government greater oversight and control over its citizens' data, shielding it from foreign surveillance and legal jurisdictions. It's a declaration that data is a national asset, to be guarded like any other resource. This creates a fascinating tension. On one hand, India is a massive and still largely untapped market for United States tech. Companies want to be there. On the other hand, these protectionist policies add significant complexity and cost to their operations. It complicates how they deploy AI models, which are often trained on massive, globally distributed data sets. It forces a decentralization that goes against the grain of their hyper-efficient, scaled infrastructure. India is essentially using its massive market as leverage, forcing big tech to play by its rules, and in the process, fostering a domestic data infrastructure and cloud ecosystem. It's a subtle but powerful push for digital sovereignty. Digital sovereignty versus big tech investment. Heading over to South America, Brazil presents a really interesting case study, a balancing act between fostering digital sovereignty and attracting massive investment from the very US tech giants it wants to be less dependent on. Brazil has been vocal about its desire to control its own digital destiny, a sentiment that was amplified years ago after revelations of US surveillance on its government. This led to a strong push for policies that promote local data storage and homegrown tech solutions, echoing some of the same themes we see in India. To make this happen, Brazil is using financial incentives as its main tool. They've implemented tax breaks and other benefits for companies that build data centers on Brazilian soil. This has been incredibly effective. Tech giants like Microsoft, Google, and AWS have all poured billions of dollars into building out their cloud infrastructure in Brazil to serve the Latin American market. So on the surface, it looks like a win-win. Brazil gets the local infrastructure and jobs, and the tech companies get to tap into a huge market without running afoul of data residency preferences. But here's the tension. While the data might be physically located in Brazil, the infrastructure is still owned, operated, and controlled by US corporations. The software, the management platforms, the core intellectual property, it's all American. So is this true digital sovereignty or just a localized version of dependency? Brazil is caught in this dilemma. It wants to build its own national tech champions, but the sheer scale, capital, and technological advantage of US big tech make them indispensable partners for now. It's a pragmatic compromise, but it highlights the immense difficulty of truly breaking free when the dominant players are so deeply embedded in the global economy. Building a sovereign cloud. The conversation in Europe, particularly led by economic powerhouses like Germany, is framed around a very specific concept: the sovereign cloud. This isn't just about where the data is stored, it's about who has control over it. The European Union has some of the strictest data privacy laws in the world, like GDPR, but there's a growing concern about U.S. laws like the Cloud Act, which could potentially compel U.S. companies to hand over data stored abroad, even in Europe. This creates a fundamental conflict of laws and a sense of digital vulnerability. The solution being pursued is nuanced. Instead of trying to build a new AWS from scratch, which would be a monumental task, they are pushing for partnerships that create walled-off, sovereign regions of existing cloud platforms. A prime example is the AWS European Sovereign Cloud. This is a version of AWS built in Europe, for Europe, that is physically and logically separate from other AWS regions. Crucially, it's designed to be operated and supported exclusively by EU resident personnel. The goal is to ensure that only EU residents can access and control the data, effectively sealing it off from non-EU legal jurisdictions. This reflects a broader EU strategy. Initiatives like Gaia-X are aimed at creating a federated, secure data infrastructure based on European values of privacy and interoperability. The goal isn't necessarily to kick US companies out, but to force them to build services that conform to strict European rules on data control and residency. It's a sophisticated attempt to have the best of both worlds: access to cutting-edge US cloud technology, but with a European-by-design layer of control and governance on top. It's a clear signal that for Europe, digital sovereignty is synonymous with data protection and legal autonomy, bans, local content rules, and hardware restrictions. Shifting back to Southeast Asia, Indonesia's approach is one of the most direct and regulatory-heavy we've seen. The Indonesian government is using a combination of local content requirements, data processing rules, and even outright hardware restrictions to assert control over its booming digital economy. It's less about building a rival to Silicon Valley, and more about ensuring that foreign companies operating in Indonesia contribute directly to the local economy and adhere to strict national rules. One of the most prominent examples is their local content level, or TKDN requirement. For a long time, this rule mandated that fourth-generation smartphones sold in the country had to be made with a certain percentage of locally sourced components or investment. This forced companies like Apple and Samsung to either set up local manufacturing or invest in local research and development to meet the threshold. It's a straightforward policy designed to spur domestic industry and tech transfer. They are now applying similar logic to software and digital services, insisting that data processing for certain sectors must happen onshore. This assertive stance can lead to some pretty dramatic headlines, like the recent temporary block on the sale of the iPhone 16. This wasn't about the technology itself, but about pressuring Apple to comply with Indonesian regulations and investment expectations. It's a high-stakes negotiation tactic. By wielding its massive and young population as a bargaining chip, Indonesia is forcing global tech giants to localize their operations in tangible ways, not just with data centers, but with manufacturing, research, and development. It's a clear message. If you want access to our market, you have to invest in our country. Steel Dome Cloud and export control pushback. And finally, let's look at Turkey, where the push for tech sovereignty is deeply intertwined with national security and defense. Turkey has been actively developing its own domestic defense industry for years, and that philosophy is now extending into the digital realm. The flagship project here is a national military-grade sovereign cloud initiative, sometimes referred to as the Steel Dome Cloud. The name itself tells you everything you need to know about its purpose. It's about creating an impenetrable digital fortress for sensitive government and military data. This initiative is driven by a deep-seated mistrust of relying on foreign infrastructure for critical operations, especially given Turkey's complex geopolitical position. The goal is to build a cloud ecosystem from the ground up using domestic technology wherever possible, ensuring that data is protected by national security protocols, not the terms of service of a foreign corporation. It's a defense-first approach to digital infrastructure, where security and state control are the absolute top priorities, even if it means sacrificing some of the convenience or cutting-edge features of global cloud providers. Beyond its own projects, Turkey has also become more assertive in pushing back against the reach of U.S. export controls, particularly when they affect its own supply chains. As a key manufacturing and logistics hub, Turkey has found itself caught in the middle of the tech rivalry between the U.S. and other nations. In response, it's tightening its own controls to prevent the country from being used as a pass-through for restricted technologies, asserting its authority over the flow of goods within its borders. This combination of building a hardened, domestic cloud and carefully policing its own tech trade shows a nation determined to carve out and defend its own sovereign space in the global tech landscape. A new digital world order. So, as we've seen from China to Brazil, from India to Germany, the story is bigger than any single country. Each of these 7 examples is a different chapter in the same book, the story of a global trend toward tech sovereignty and digital self-reliance. The era of a single, U.S.-led global tech ecosystem is clearly fading. What's replacing it is a more fragmented, more complex, and more competitive multipolar world. Nations are building digital walls, not with bricks and mortar, but with data laws, local content rules, and domestic innovation initiatives. This isn't necessarily a good or bad thing, it's just the next phase of our connected world. It will likely lead to more resilient national infrastructure and could spur innovation in unexpected places. But it also means a more complicated internet, potential barriers for businesses, and maybe even a different online experience depending on where you live. The devices and services of tomorrow might be designed not for a global audience, but for a specific national or regional ecosystem, built on a foundation of sovereign technology. The ripple effects of this shift are just beginning. This is a story we're going to be following for the next decade at least. It's going to reshape entire industries, transform economies, and change how we all experience technology in our everyday lives. It's a fascinating and incredibly important development to watch. To make sure you don't miss any updates on this global tech shift, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.